Howdy gamers! Welcome to a very base tutorial where I'm going to be showing you 3 different ways to convert maps from various racing games into Minecraft. The way this is going to be working is that we can import data from different sorts of games and model sources here. We have pretty much 3 different categories. We're going to first start off with importing a model via just an OBJ file or any kind of 3D format really right into Blender. So the one we're going to go with an example here is going to be from Mario Kart 8. So that's going to be basically part 1 of the tutorial. Part 2 of the tutorial, we're going to be importing data from Google Maps. It's going to be 3D terrain data that you can find, and we're going to be getting this through RenderDoc, a 3D program for extracting data, and then that's going to be converted into Blender with a special importing tool. Part 3 is going to be importing data from Assetto Corsa or rFactor, pretty much any kind of sim racing game, and we're going to be getting this data into 3DCimEd. It's a program for editing these tracks. And then we're going to be using various programs like XNConvert to change these texture formats from DDS files over to PNGs, and then get those into Blender. Then of course, so pretty much along this whole process of getting maps, the goal really is we're going to be getting them into Blender every single time, exporting them as an OBJ. Now of course within Blender we're going to be doing certain things like to reduce the size of the model, the polygon count, and to make it better suited for the next program, which is ObjToSchematic. This is a really great program that I've come to found within the past few year or two, and it basically lets you import 3D models as OBJs or GLBs, and it has a really great system for exporting them to Minecraft schematics, and it's pretty straightforward from there that you just throw it right onto your server. And we'll also show you a little bit of some things on how you can load up these maps and get WorldEdit running nicely so you could do some optimizations and make them look better again. So anyways, that gives a good overview, and let's get right into it. So for first part of the tutorial here, we have part 1, which is to convert video game data, for example from Mario Kart or any 3D source you can find, into Minecraft. So essential programs you're going to need a web browser. I am running on a fresh install here of Windows 11, so I'll be able to follow along with you guys. Of course, the second thing you're going to need, we're going to have to install a few programs now, and this is what I have all arranged here on my desktop with the programs you'll need. We're just going to go to our documents to begin with, and from here, you can make a new folder, call it Minecraft 3D modeling. You know, it's a good just generic name. Throw that down, and we're going to work inside of here to get our various programs laid out and project folders. From within here, we're going to start off with Blender. Now, the way it works is that we're going to be going and working with a specific version of Blender. It's going to be Blender 3.4.0. And the reason is that as later on in the tutorial, we're going to be going ahead and getting data from Google Maps. RenderDoc is going to require pretty much a specific version of Blender, so it's better just to start this way if you want to try to do parts 2 and 3. Otherwise, you could use whatever version of Blender you want, but this is the official site for downloading older versions of Blender. This is where you could grab it from if you're on Mac or whatever else. But we're going to be going with the portable version, so this is where we have Blender 3.4.0-Windows x64.zip. And so this is the one you're going to want to go for, so we could kind of make this whole project isolated to this folder. So that's what I have already downloaded right here. And now inside my Minecraft 3D modeling folder, what I can do from here is just extract it, extract all, and we wait for a little bit. Okay, so after waiting an eternity on this stupid virtual machine hard disk, here we have Blender. Now, so we could delete this zip folder, we don't need that. We got Blender nicely installed, and inside here, we can go ahead and do if you want. You can right click, show more options, create shortcut. So this way, we're gonna make a shortcut for Blender, and we're just gonna move it over to our main folder. There we have it. Let's got that guy across like this. And now you'll be able to easily open up Blender whenever you need to from within this folder. So next up, the next important program we're going to need is one called Notepad++. Here's the Notepad++ downloader page. It doesn't matter what version you get, you just get a version from here. And now this might be, I guess, in a way more relevant towards part 2 of the tutorial or part 3 really, but it is still good practice to install it for now. We might get errors, you never know, with whatever 3D models we're getting from online. So it's a good program to have because with this Notepad program, you'll be able to edit 3D OBJ files directly from inside. You can go ahead, once you have the install, you can delete the installer. So now with that shortcut, if you do make one, if you want, you can just move that into the folder, and this way everything's nicely organized. Next, now a third program finally that you could also get, it's a good idea, is to get 3D Viewer. So it's practical to have this if at any point along the way you want to be able to check up on whether your model is working or not, if it's corrupted, you can get that from the Microsoft Store. But for now, let's go ahead and actually get into sort of starting this whole process. For at least part 1 of the tutorial, we're going to be going ahead with a Mario Kart map. We're going to go find it on a website called themodelsresource.com. So I'll link this in the description. It has tons of great tracks from Mario Kart 8. If we just check out the page right here, you see they have all sorts of models, like actual tracks from them. There's lots of good resources from here you can find for Mario Kart 8 or even older Mario Kart maps. But no matter your way of getting 3D models, this should all work. You can pretty much just go ahead from this site if you want, and you can click download zip archive. I already have the file right here on my desktop, so that's this one right here. And now inside your Minecraft 3D modeling folder, what you could do from here is you could just go ahead, create a new folder, and that's where we're gonna be working with this Mario Kart project. So I'm gonna make a new folder, call it MK8 Cheap Beach. There we go. And so now inside this folder, we're gonna make another subfolder, and we're gonna call this Game Data. So this is gonna be a folder where we're gonna have our 3D model, and we're gonna have all the textures inside here. So this way, you know, it doesn't get in the way of your other files. So go extract all. Game data right there, click extract, and we wait. So now looking inside here, you can see, let's change the view over. Inside this folder now, basically your game data folder, you're gonna have all these texture files that you immediately will see. But so inside here, the main files that are important you see is that you have a 3D object file, an MTL file, and a whole bunch of PNGs. So the whole idea with the 3D models is that you have a 3D object file that kind of defines the shape of your object. The .mtl file is a file basically that communicates with the 3D object file, and it assigns all these PNG textures to the different parts of the 3D object model. What's interesting is that now we have Notepad++ installed, we could go inside of this and we could click here, open with, choose another app, and we're gonna go take a look inside of the files because this will be useful for later on. Choose an app on your PC. You go to Program Files, Notepad. I've seen issues happen where sometimes an OBJ file will have NaN errors inside, but as long as you have all just coordinates inside that file for your OBJ, you're fine to move on. Otherwise, inside here you have the .mtl file. We're gonna open that with Notepad as well. And inside here you'll see a bunch of data with file extensions. You'll be able to see how you have coordinates, but more importantly, you have locations, and you can see right here, there's all these texture names like octable.png. So that's what the MTL file is basically doing. Click on always there. And another good idea is just along the way, you could always check in 3D Viewer. So let's see here so far. It doesn't look to be fully loading it in, but it might look better in Blender. So what we're gonna do right now, we're gonna open up Blender and we're gonna check out the model over there. So, okay, so here we are in Blender now. You click off of this menu right here, it doesn't really matter. What I pretty much do whenever I start a new scene, I just delete everything. So you could drag across your whole screen like so, select everything, and then just hit the delete key on your keyboard. So we're gonna import the file. It's gonna go from here, under File, Import, and we're gonna go to wavefront.obj. Then from here, we're gonna navigate over to our 3D modeling folder, open up Mario Kart 8 Cheap Beach, go into Game Data, and we're gonna open up the OBJ file here into Blender. Okay, so it looks like the map is now loaded into Blender. We can zoom out a little bit. We get a nice overview of everything. What we're gonna start off with doing is we're just gonna check the map out with its textures. So in the top right corner, you can change the texture viewport mode from just the shading to the actual texture mode, which is one circle off to the right there. And there we go. We get a nice visual of the whole map. And as you rotate around, you can see the different features, the sand, the boardwalk. And although it does look a little bit weird in the Blender viewport, for the most part, this should look all right once we get it into ObjToSchematic later on. It's just from the Blender rendering scene here, it doesn't look as clean. Okay, so to begin with, once you have a model in here, a good idea to start with is to look at how you can cull down the size of the map. And so first off, that means you have to be able to see the whole map. One of the tricks we're gonna go ahead and do is we're gonna click on the N key. And then after hitting the N key, it opens up this little menu. We're gonna click on the view menu, and we're gonna change our view end section to be, instead of 1,000 meters, we're gonna change it up to 10,000 meters. So, and now you can actually see the full model even from a far distance away. So effectively, everything that's outside of this square region right here looks to be just a skybox, and we're gonna go ahead and remove that. So to do so, we have to go ahead and first select the entire model by hitting the A key. Then we're gonna change our mode from object mode over to edit mode. So there we go, now we're in edit mode. And to make sure we can actually reach all the polygons, we're gonna change over to the wireframe model, which is from the top right corner here. So now what we can go ahead and do is, over with this little view feature right here, you can click on the Z button so you can get a top-down view of the model. And we're gonna go ahead now and start removing everything on the outside except for what's inside the squared region. So let's go ahead and take a big selection like this. You see, I'm being careful not to get into that square region because we don't want to take away core features of the model, but I'm pretty much taking everything out from the outside that we won't be needing. It would really only cause extra struggle for your model if you had all that included, and it would cause more strain on processes down the line. So we want to shave all that off. And now if we come in here, we could change from edit mode back over to object mode and change the viewport back over to shaded. You can see right here that now we pretty much just have the track model itself, much better, refined looking. Even though we have this weird graphical bug with the water, I don't believe that will be around anyways once we start getting to ObjToSchematic. You don't have to worry about that. Okay, so next up, a very useful feature to also note is the decimate feature. So over on the right side here in Blender, you can see how there's these different buttons you could go on. But anyways, what we're gonna go ahead and do is we're going to add some modifier features now to this object. So we're gonna go to modifier properties right here. In our case, it looks to be that we have a lot of object files separate here in the model. So what we're gonna go ahead and do is just right click all those, join. So now everything is joined into one object, and from here, it's easier for us to add modifiers. So right there, we just joined everything together, and now we can go ahead and add modifiers. So we add the decimate tool right here, and now from within decimate, you could get some information about the size of the model. So right here, we can see it says that we have 200,000, around 200,000 faces. Ideally, you want to get that face count to around under 1 million, and it's better to be more in the range of like 800,000 or so. Down the line when you're using the other programs like ObjToSchematic, it's much better to have a smaller face count. And so it looks like our model right now is actually okay. We don't have to decimate it, but let's just go and try it out for the sake of the tutorial. So we can go ahead and change our ratio to something like 0.9. And when you do that, see right here, it reduces the face count. So now we're a little bit under 200,000. We're at 190,000 faces. And you can add this ratio, I would say up to a maximum of around 0.6. You don't really want to go beyond 0.6 because at that point you might really start losing model quality, and there's no real point in doing that. So let's just keep it around 0.9 for the sake of the tutorial. That looks good. So the next step, we're going to be going and looking at the actual position of the track. So with these sorts of different transforms you can apply, you can see right here we can apply different sorts of rotations to the circuit. What we want is that we want the start-finish line to directly align with the Minecraft grid. So over here in the model, it looks to be that it might already be aligned for us, luckily. I'm gonna hit the A key, and we're gonna go over to, on the sidebar right here, you can see you can change over to the move tool, and we can move it around a little bit. So we can move it slightly below the Blender grid. That's a good way so we can see a comparison. And it looks to be that we are lucky because this model already comes aligned properly with the grid, but in further points, you might end up having to actually rotate it a little bit. So if it does come about to be an issue that your track is maybe on a diagonal, it's a good idea to reorient your start-finish line with the grid so it'll look better in Minecraft. And you can always do that here, see, within Blender. So you can apply, I believe, rotations around the Z-axis here. See if we apply 90, it'll rotate by 90 degrees. And that's a slider that you could even use so you could get nice alignment. Once you apply all those different changes for position and rotation, you want to hit the Control A key. And what this will do is that it'll apply all of your modifiers for position. So we're going to do Control A, apply all transformations. And this way, when we open the model in subsequent programs like ObjToSchematic, all these transformations will be applied to the model already, and you won't have to redo anything. So moving on, let's go ahead and start exporting this now. So we could get this file out of Blender. We're gonna go to the File menu, go to Export, and we're gonna move on down here to just a simple wavefront.obj. So inside our Minecraft 3D modeling folder, we got Cheap Cheap Beach. And now we're gonna go ahead for our first export. So we're gonna right click, make a new folder, call it Cheap Export V1. You never know if you'll need more, so let's just go ahead and start with one version. We're just gonna call the file something like Cheap V1 Export, or Cheap Export V1. There we go. And now pay attention right here to your sidebar. Eventually, later on in the tutorial, we'll be using the grouping modes for exporting certain segments of objects that you select. But for now, we don't have to worry about any of the settings. So we can just go ahead and export that OBJ. So now we're gonna go check on it, see if it's exported. Go over here to Cheap Export V1. So there we go. Now we can see here in the 3D viewer program, the model looks actually pretty damn good. Even though the water looked a little bit glitched out in Blender, it actually looks far better right now in 3D viewer. And it's good to see that the model looks to be functioning quite well. So let's close this off. Now, something else with the Blender file, it's always good to do in case if you want to make changes to this later on, or if you have to re-export it, we're just gonna go ahead and click Save As on the file. And inside the Cheap Beach folder, we're just gonna call this the similar name, so this way we'll have the Blender file if we need later on. cheapbeach.blend, save as that, and now we could go ahead and quit off the program. Now, within our Cheap Beach folder, we have our original game data, which was right here. We have our Cheap Beach Blender file, and we also have now the exported files with our new OBJ and MTL documents. Now, these files right here do not have textures inside of them. This MTL file is still referring to textures over in your game data folder, so just keep that in mind. You kind of have to keep this all together. Now, let's move on to ObjToSchematic. This is a great program that I found out within the past year or so that basically lets you convert any 3D models you find into Minecraft. So the way that ObjToSchematic was initially developed, it was made to be an offline program that you can see right here on the GitHub page for it. It has different releases, and the latest one was v0.7.1. Now, the thing is that this program isn't fully updated to have all the latest features. That's why now it is also hosted as a website. I would generally suggest that it's good to start off with the website version of the tool. Although if you would like to be able to use it offline, or you're finding RAM limitations with your model, maybe the offline one could work slightly better for you. So now the only thing to make note of is the fact that with the offline version, you can only open up files as .objs. Whereas with the website version, you can open them up as .objs or .glbs. One of the things you'll see right here is that with the online version of ObjToSchematic, if I go ahead and load up a file, like a 3D model, we'll go overhead to our documents, 3D modeling, and we'll open up our Cheap Beach Export V1 3D object file here. We're gonna hit open on it. We're gonna load our mesh. We don't need any rotations because we applied those already. Whoa, look at this. Now, unfortunately, you can see how right now I've opened up Cheap Beach, but it has all these really weird, crappy colors all over it. So the problem is that ObjToSchematic can load OBJ files, but it cannot load the .mtl file, which, as I discussed previously in the tutorial, the .mtl file is what will actually assign all the textures. So there's all these texture slots, but the thing is that the ObjToSchematic program doesn't know how to access them. Of course, you can, let's say, go along these different texture materials here and click on the texture mode and choose a file to individually upload from your game data, but honestly, with some models, that could take a very long time. So the better method is to just go back into Blender, and instead of exporting as a .obj file, we're gonna go and export as a .glb file. So here we go. We're back in Blender. Let's go now to File, Export, and .glb. We could still put this within Cheap Export V1 as a .glb. We'll hit export on that. Let's go check it out. Okay, so now that we re-exported the file, you can see a difference here. Now that this new file is as a GLB, all the textures are actually embedded inside of this one 3D object file. So you don't have to worry about messing with the .mtl anymore. You can see that it is a little bit bigger. It's 34 megabytes now. So we can quit off Blender, and let's go ahead and try the online version of ObjToSchematic. Okay, so here we go. Back in ObjToSchematic now, we could hit the open button and export Cheap Beach. So here we go. The model is now loaded into the program, and we can look around to make sure that it looks all right and all the textures are nicely included now. So let's go ahead and scroll down further throughout this list. We have a very big list of textures that you can pretty much just scroll past. It's at the very bottom of the list that we have the actual important options. We're gonna wanna start voxelizing this model. First off, we pretty much have the whole sizing of the model. Now, this is a very finicky one that you might have to come back later on to adjust. But anyways, we're gonna try to define a starting point for our size of the model. So right here you see you have constraints. We're gonna set this to a y-axis height. So we're gonna be measuring our model from up and down. It's generally the best thing. Generally, it's the best to go and measure your model from up and down because especially for racetracks, they tend to be very wide. They cover a lot of surface area. And there are limits within ObjToSchematic of how big you can set it to 380. And we're gonna set our size to being around 50 blocks to begin with. And this is just me eyeballing this model. I would estimate that, it would be reasonable to start with 50 blocks tall for, let's say, some of the tallest trees we have on top of this little mountaintop. It looks about right that it would maybe be around 50 blocks tall. So we're gonna go ahead and start with that and see what this looks like. We're gonna keep our algorithm as ray-based. Ambient occlusion and multi-sampling, they're just visualizer things for inside your rendering window. You don't actually need those on. And otherwise, color accuracy, you can leave it as is, but of course, if you do want to experiment, you can always see the difference it makes on the extremes, but generally it's best to keep it at a default value. So there you go. We voxelized the model, but it looks to be that because of the fact that there's a whole extra segment below the model, a height of 50 isn't actually scaling quite like I would have liked it to be. So I'm just gonna be right back and we're gonna actually remove the lower segment of this map.
I still see your bus stop on my route. Can't buy back the shares that I sold you. It's to the point where I gotta face it. My kids who can't take it, so I must replace it. Now I'm back on.
So there we go. We can scroll past all the materials to the bottom of the page. And let's go ahead and start off with our model at a size of 50. Turn off ambient occlusion, turn off multi-sampling, now let's voxelize. There we go, and it looks like we have a nice voxelized model now of Cheep Cheep Beach. So now, pretty much within this model, we can eyeball everything. It looks to be about to scale. If ever you made it too big or too small, you just wanna get a baseline that looks about right and that doesn't crash your computer. Now throughout the block palette here, you wanna leave these all on. I've at least found from my experience that if you ever turn one of these blocks off and they were needed in the model, you'd end up with just a bunch of air blocks. So it's ideal to leave all the block palettes on. Now dithering, this is personal preference. I'll show you an image here of what dithering is on screen. So pretty much it's this whole effect of like blending together blocks so you can get a shade of grays. But generally speaking, when it comes to these sort of 3D models and retexturing processes, you usually don't want to have dithering on. You want to just have a set color palette for each type of block around the map, and we'll be going and changing that later on ourselves with WorldEdit, so as to make sure that the model looks nice and clean with all the edges. So dithering we're going to turn off. Followable blocks, you want to leave that as is. Color accuracy and smoothness are also two sliders that you can mess around, learn more about at their extremes and see what the model looks like. But generally speaking, it is best to just keep them at their default values of 5. Smoothness I do like to increase just a little bit. Pretty much it all boils down to if you want to have a more plasticky feel and just like plain feeling with all the textures, you can increase smoothness. If you reduce it, you'll get a more grainy effect, and the program will opt to use more textures like ores. So calculate line will leave off, and let's go ahead now and assign blocks. There we go. So after assigning blocks now, you can see this looks like a really good baseline, at least to begin with. And if anything, I think I might actually just increase the smoothness a little bit after seeing this. So reassign blocks, see what it looks like now. Yeah, after taking another look, it looks a little bit better with this smoothness level. So this is what we're gonna go ahead and roll with and get it in game. So at the very bottom of the list right here, you can see now we have an export feature. So we can go ahead and export as a .schematic file and export structure. So here we go. So now, of course, let's just go grab this file and move it back into our documents folder with the rest of the documents here for Cheep Cheep Beach. I'm gonna go ahead now and install Minecraft, and we're gonna go and set this up now on a single player server to go check it out.
I gotta face it, my kids who can't take it, so I must replace it. Now I'm back on the trail, got me a monorail, watching me some sled and getting this bread. You got a subsidy, but them shits on me, I won't let you beat me. I still see you building like dumb too. Can't buy back the dog that I sold you. It's to the point where I gotta face it, my big well can't.
Oh, it's on. Damn, that's nice. It's stunning. All right, cool. It's already included. So let's go ahead and actually just move the file now into our mods folder. Actually, we don't need that. We're gonna click on Minecraft folder right there. So here we go now. We could access our mods folder, and inside of here, we could go over to config, and we could go to the folder for WorldEdit right here. Let's make a new world. We'll see if that works. Oh, there we go. Schematics. So now we can go ahead and grab our new schematic for our track, and let's just move it over here into our WorldEdit folder. Anyways, one thing that I did forget to do on export here is that if you had your model at a height of 50, we're gonna go ahead and actually rename our file here, and you should name it as such when you're exporting. Cheap Cheap Beach 50. So this way, you'll actually be able to know that within the schematic file, the height of your model was 50 blocks tall. And what we're gonna go ahead and do is we're gonna measure this file, and we might end up changing that a little bit to being 60 or 70 down the line. So here we go. Now that we have Minecraft set up, we're gonna copy that file over to our schematics folder for WorldEdit in single player. And we're gonna go ahead and make a new world now in Minecraft. So I'm just gonna call it something like map testing, creative. Inside the world, we're gonna go super flat, and what we're gonna basically just do is remove every single layer so that effectively we just have a void world. Okay, so here I am now in a void world. What I always like doing is once you're inside, just do the command /setBlock ~1 Minecraft gold block. And so we have a place to stand here. What we're gonna go ahead and do is we're gonna do /schem load, and we're gonna put in the name of the track that we have. So it's gonna be Cheap Beach 50.schematic. Now it's loaded, we can go ahead and /paste it down, and we're gonna go take a look at our model finally. So there we go. It looks like as we were exporting as a sponge schematic, this is the much better option, because now as we go ahead and look in game, all of our textures are much better preserved. The best thing we can go ahead and do is actually measure what our resultant baseline model was. So this we had scaled at 50 blocks in the Y height. We could go ahead and actually measure different features of this track now that we actually have it in game. And I also have the visualizer mod, so it looks good. Let's say if after measuring this distance right here to be 68 blocks long, I find out that the actual game Mario Kart, this distance is supposed to be something around 136 blocks long, then I know that I just have to scale up my height factor by 2, and instead of 50 blocks height, I do 100 blocks height for this distance to get doubled. So that's kind of a trick you could apply to make sure that your model will eventually be 1-to-1 scale as you convert it around for the second time in ObjToSchematic. Already though, we have a great model now that has nice textures applied to it. You can redo these models, let's say with WorldEdit. So a good trick is just do a big /cell poly selection. You could actually go into spectator. We could do /pose1 to start a new selection. And we could do /pose2 to expand upon a bigger selection set. So if let's say I want to select, I could go ahead and select the whole island, let's say. And now, if I want, I could change over these trees. So instead of having skulk blocks, I could do /replace skulk with oak leaves. And there we go. Now you see how these trees look just a little better. And I could also do it with different palettes, like let's say the dark prismarine and whatever else I need. So that's a good way that you could apply big selections to your model, and you could change the palette to look a little bit more natural for Minecraft. But otherwise though, that seems to be pretty much where we conclude things here for the first part of the tutorial with the Mario Kart maps. Let's go move on now to the Google Maps data.